I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your counsellor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, it's time for your weekly discussion of local government governance news from around the sector and beyond. And to help me with that, we've got the A-team on the panel today. Tony Rownick is here from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. Hi, Tony.
G'day, Chris. Hey, Julie.
And Julie Reid, as Tony's just hinted, is also there with us from Julie A. Reid & Associates. Hi, Julie.
Morning, Chris. Morning, Tony. Feeling good this morning? It's been a busy week again for all of us, I'm sure.
Busy keeping warm. It's been a little bit chilly this week, hasn't it? But no shortage of hot news from around the sector. And Tony, we've got a hint that the long-awaited Operation Sandon report, we might start with this, we could be seeing that in just a couple of weeks if the reports from the Australian and other media outlets are correct.
Yeah, long awaited, as you say, Chris. Way back in 2019, those public hearings started. That of course, the Australian report says that be tabled in the IBAC report will be tabled in the Vic Parliament on the 26th of July. That's of course subject to any more last-minute Supreme Court injunction efforts or anything like that. But
have we heard, Tony, if that is the case? I saw that speculation in the report that they believed a number of witnesses would be looking to file some last-minute action to stop the release of the report. I wondered, surely that opportunity has already been afforded, though?
One would think so. One would think so with that decision in May that really shut that down for the Mr. Woodman, at least, or interests associated with him. But yeah, won't we be waiting with bated breath? Really curious to learn, what are the wider implications for the sector? What will the recommendations be, and what will the government's response be? Should elected officials be able to determine planning, rezoning sort of decisions? What's the role of lobbyists moving forwards in terms of dealing with councillors and elected officials around planning decisions? And what about property donations from property developers? That's in the mix as well.
And of course, there's some broader political implications that the media has been speculating on here at a state government level. But Julie, realistically, do you think this, I know you've got a planning background, do you think this could lead to really significant changes in the way the planning system operates at the local level?
Yeah, I think it will, Chris. I think that what happened, there were proposals to change the planning system, which, as you know, were put on hold before the election. There was quite a bit of change proposed to councils at that time, and councils were waiting with bated breath to see whether that was going to go forward before the election. It all got put on hold. My take is that they will wait for the Sandon release, and maybe then at that point there will be further review of planning controls around that time based on that, and that will all go into the mix of big planning reform, I believe, that is coming. Look, it's well overdue. The planning system needs a major overhaul. Everybody knows that. It's very clunky. It's very old. It is not performing in the way that people would expect. So I think this is going to be the catalyst for major change coming.
Yeah, of course, we're just speculating, and we'll probably wait to see what it says before we get into it in too much detail. I was just thinking, as you were saying that, Julie, perhaps an example of where some change might be needed is what's playing out in Frankston at the moment. I'm not sure if you're across that, but developments proposed in almost sort of coastal areas. The council's taken a particular position. There's community campaigns. The minister's stepped in this week, and the mayor's taken the step of putting out a statement about, where the council's been coming from here. And to the layperson, it's probably very confusing, isn't it?
That's right, Chris. I believe the minister put a mandatory height control down in Frankston. and that is a metropolitan activity centre. So very interesting that she stepped in and made that call. And I know that they've got a new structure plan that they've released down at Frankston, and it's a question of, when will that be supported through the minister? I'm sure that they were seeking support from the minister around that. There's been a substantial amount of work done by Frankston City Council in that space. So what's going to happen to the rest of that work is the question. So look, interesting statement put out, interesting quick decision by the minister. That it has been very controversial downward there, particularly along the creek and the foreshore.
Thanks for dealing with that hand pass really well, because I didn't put it on the list. It just occurred to me as we were talking about Sandon, but I knew you'd be across it. We've got some CEO news this week. The big CEO job in the state, of course, is at a council level, is the City of Melbourne. And this week, the acting CEO since last October, Alison Layton, has been confirmed as the CEO on an ongoing basis at the City of Melbourne, and a decision that seems to have been warmly welcomed around the sector. Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, Alison been there since April 2020 at Melbourne City Council, and more recently acting since about October, I think, formerly CEO at Baw Shire. She's a qualified engineer. We have a two female leadership team now there with Sally Capp and Alison, and I think the decision suggests that perhaps the council's valued some stability, a known, quality, quantity there in Alison. And I think it's been hailed across the sector as a smart call.
As you say, and I think the Mayor even used the word stability and a proven record of delivery. I've got a bit of a controversial Dorothy Dixer to throw at you. Someone said to me during the week, a lot of money to spend on a recruitment process to end up with the internal effectively being appointed. And it's prompted a bit of a discussion about, well, what price transparency and to get a result, appointment on merit. Julie, it's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation though, isn't it?
It is really, Chris. And I think that, I think it's good that they go through a really transparent process and test the market to see, who's really credible for this role, who's out there. I mean, they probably were very pleased, obviously, with Alison. But I think for a major capital city, I think you need to kind of test the market and see who's out there. And I think it's a fair and reasonable process to go through. I know that there's great costs associated with that, but I think for that kind of decision, it's really, really important, I think, to be transparent and run that process. And, Alison's proven her worth through that process, and she deserves the job. So fantastic. Well done, Alison. A great appointment. She comes with lots of experience and is a very valued people leader at Melbourne. So good on her.
Yeah, I'll probably use the wrong cliche there. It was more playing devil's advocate than throwing out a Dorothy Dixer. But, imagine what would happen, though, if you didn't go through that full process.
Correct.
Exactly. So, as I say, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But you use that term, test the market. And that's what comes to mind with Greater Shepparton this week. This news just broke in the last 24 hours. The council there has decided this week, I believe, held a confidential session on Tuesday, to test the market and advertise the CEO position. Peter Harriet's been there for 8 years or thereabouts. His contract is due to expire this coming January, and the Mayor, quite generously in the media, says he's welcome to reapply for his position. I've got a pretty strong view on this, and I'm probably not going to express it as strongly as I would like to, but that's the prerogative of the council to say we want to test the market, isn't it?
It is a prerogative of the council, Chris, but what kind of message does it send back to the CEO? It's an interesting situation, and I always struggle when councils fall into this situation, because you question then, are they really interested in, keeping their CEO or not, is the question that I would put. It wouldn't motivate a CEO, a situation like that, to want to stay. So, an interesting situation. Look, Shepparton, has it been in the news very much?
No, not
No,
really.
no, it's flying under the radar a bit. Didn't think that there were any issues there. So it's an interesting decision by the council, and one that we'll probably never really understand at a deeper level. But, you know,
Yeah.
let's watch that one with interest to see what happens.
Well, you've said some of what I would have liked to have said there. Tony, what's your view? From a legal standpoint, of course, there's nothing wrong with doing this. It's
No, not at all, not at all. But yeah, putting my former councillor hat on, I'd say, look, there's unlikely to be a uniform view amongst the councillors.
Yeah.
And there may be some councillors who are very supportive of the existing CEO and others who aren't, and others saying, well, you know, let's see what's out there. I'm not sure. Let's see what's out there. And, you know, there might be some absolute, you know, champion out there that we might have the opportunity to secure. But, you know, I don't think it necessarily foreshadows an outcome because, you know, there's not one uniform view necessarily amongst that group of councillors.
Okay, let me put it to you this way. How often do you see a council say we're going to advertise the CEO's role because, you know, perhaps in our minds we think it's our responsibility to see who else is out there to make sure we've got the best person for the job? How often does it end up that the incumbent then gets a new contract?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris. And I think, you know, I agree with the implicit comment you're making there about what it suggests. But I've certainly often heard councillors say, "Oh, you know, regardless, we should test the market and show that we've made an attempt to see, you know, that we've got the very best person for the job." Occasionally, that narrative is what gets up.
All right. The other thing I will say is this is one of the things I really dislike about the role of the CEO becoming part of this political dynamic, this ongoing speculation about the individual. It's the stuff that sort of goes to what you were saying, Julie, last week, that goes with the role that then makes you think, well, you know, am I actually being paid enough to be put in this position?
That's right. It is a high profile, you know, it's paid highly because of the risks associated with the job itself. And we saw what happened down at Warrnambool with the previous CEO, took the council on, as we spoke about, won the case, but then the contract was due for renewal and they said, well, we're going to advertise the position. So at the end, he lost out because the contract was due for renewal and there was no opportunity really for him. He knew then that he'd really lost. So difficult circumstance for CEOs.
Yeah. Okay. As you say, what is the message that's being sent here? We might leave that one, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we're talking about that. What it has done is put a second at the top of the list of the CEO positions to be determined. Bass Coast and effectively now Greater Shepparton sit at the list as needing to be determined in the coming months. Tony, you might be able to help me with this one. I was a little bit confused about what's actually happened here. The federal government announced nearly $2 billion in fast-track disaster recovery funding for councils around the country. Victoria then, we learned through the MAV, quite a very strong and angry statement from the MAV President David Clark. Victoria said, we're not going to facilitate that fast-tracked funding, meaning the implication being that Victoria misses out, or at least has to wait where other states don't. Does that, have I got that right?
Yeah, and I wondered why this might occur. And it seems that this disaster funding recovery arrangement is a cost share program with the state and Commonwealth. So I think that the state, the implication for the state is if to bring this funding forward is that they would have to bring their contribution forward as well. And I gather that's what the Victorian government has refused to do. The only state, I should say, in Australia that has made that determination. And as you say, David Clark from the MAV, the president of the MAV, hasn't minced his words, you know, said he's straight out angry. It's completely unacceptable. he's certainly referred to those, the fact that councils have a recovery program around the flooding in October of 2022, and this decision will no doubt put back the timing of some of those programs around recovery of infrastructure, just because councils don't typically commission work until they've got the funding, potentially the funding in their account. So it'll arrive eventually, but yeah, it seems that the implications are a slowdown, perhaps, or a slower arrangement with some of those recovery projects.
So you're confident from reading between the lines of the messaging that's out there that it doesn't mean Victoria won't get the funding, it's just a timing issue.
That's correct. Simply, it's not accelerated, and we get it at a pace that is the usual pace, albeit slower than any of the other states now in Australia, given the decision to accelerate in those states.
Let us move on to the disruption of council meetings, which seems to be making news pretty much every week these days. A couple of developments this week. Latrobe City Council made the decision to move its council meeting online this past week, and for the foreseeable future until they do a review, there'll be no public gallery at their meetings. That's happened just as Yarra Ranges, which put a similar arrangement in place a couple of months ago, says, well, we're going to reopen the public gallery from next week at our council meetings. No sooner have they done that than we learn that they are in the Supreme Court, with this gentleman associated with the My Place group taking Yarra Ranges to the Supreme Court. Now, again, Tony, the legal perspective here we're looking for from you, I gather he's saying that because there's been no public gallery, there's been no opportunity for meaningful engagement with the community, and they're talking about a particular issue of a design framework in one of Yarra Ranges' tourist towns.
Yeah, that would appear to be the only argument that you could make, although suggesting that one had been excluded from participating, it would be a difficult argument to make, given that anyone could, participate through the digital platform. That matter went to court this week on the 4th of July, and it's been adjourned for a one-day trial on Thursday, the 3rd of August, before Justice Melinda Richards of the Supreme Court. So yeah, we'll and I imagine we'll have a pretty quick decision as well. But yeah, it was sort of heartening to see as well. I thought that Yarra Ranges has made that decision to reopen the public gallery at their meetings. The Mayor, Jim Child, in a statement said, he's really looking forward to welcoming the community back into the gallery. That council had felt it had been necessary to have that temporary closure to maintain a safe working place. And he, really also in his statement called for attendees to really be respectful and mindful of their demeanour when they attend meetings. And I think this is a dilemma all councils are facing at the moment.
Yeah, but what's changed, I would ask, in those couple of months, given these disruptions are still happening in other areas? Is it just that they felt that we couldn't make an argument to keep the gallery closed for a longer period, or is it that there's been time to put some arrangements in place to manage the disruption better?
I haven't looked at whether they've made any changes to their governance rules. They may well have made some physical changes to the room that meetings are conducted in. But, I'd urge all councils to be looking at their own governance rules at the moment, whether they've had this, My Place, sovereign citizens crowd attend or not. There may well be disruptive elements on the way. How do you conduct your council meeting question time? Is it simply an open mic forum where anyone can get up, stand up and speak into a microphone? Or is it a bit more formalised where questions need to be put by a particular day prior to the meeting? Are the questions read out by the mayor or the CEO and, so someone doesn't get to grandstand with the mic? Is there an ability in the Gov rules to maybe limit the number of questions on a night or the number of questions on a particular topic? If you get 10 questions on 5G or, COVID, and also is the chair aware of and confident in using the rules, like warning the speaker to be respectful, warning councillors to address their comments through the chair, calling for a recess or an adjournment if things get out of hand. So there's a lot of work, internal work councils can do, I think, to make them better prepared.
So you can have all those rules in place, but of course you need the people who are attending to respect and abide by those. And that's where we've had the issue, Julie, isn't it? Where these people just don't actually recognise and accept that the rules are there and they're there for a good reason.
That's correct, Chris. And, this is half the battle of particularly the CEO in trying to manage that, OHS issue of, people being shouted down in the chamber when they're not meant to be acting like that. So it's interesting. I think the other sort of dimension to this is about, obviously there was concern about whether or not the community was engaged properly on the design framework. I think for Mombolk it was. Well, councils are very good and will normally run a separate consultation session on frameworks, on planning, controls, etc., structure plans through that normal process of engaging the community. So there's a claim here that they weren't effectively or meaningfully engaged. The question is, were they engaged, or did they have the opportunity. to be engaged in this design framework? They may just be unhappy with, the way that was unfolded, and then they wanted to use the council meeting to hijack the decision. Well, that's not really the point of the council meetings. You've already done all the work by that stage, and then you're getting to the council meeting. It's not, I just think that, it's either the question of, does the council need to have a look at the way that they are engaging in these types of projects? Do they need to look at a more deliberative type of engagement on that type of project? Or did they already do that? And then this was just an opportunity for those people that were unhappy with the way it was heading just to hijack the meeting and criticise the council.
I think it's a bit of sport for them, to be honest. Let's see how many points we can score and how disruptive we can be. Tony, can we draw any inference from the fact that it is just a one-day hearing that's been set? Is it a simple question of law that's been considered here?
Look, I would think that it suggests that the judge feels that clearly all the arguments are going to be heard on the day, and it is a really discrete issue, and I think we might see an early decision on this, frankly.
Yeah.
Okay. Those comments, I certainly agree, Julie, in terms of councils rethinking perhaps some of their consultation processes on issues, but some of these people that are attending council meetings, you're not going to cut through to them is the issue. And I had a look at the My Place website, and I don't like promoting these crowds, but there's some, just on the face of their website, there's some absolute nonsense, and they're, there's a class action that they're promoting about COVID, and what they say this is on their front page of their website. Come and learn the truth about the COVID fraud. COVID does not exist.
Oh.
It's a USA Department of Defense nanotechnology biowarfare against all Australians, supported by the World Health Organization and the pharmaceutical industry. The scientific and legal evidence has been lodged with the Australian Federal Court. So, gee, that's going to be a good case, isn't it? We're going to watch that one. But that's what we're dealing with. So, I'm not sure how you cut through.
No, exactly. Yeah, it sounds like a losing battle, doesn't it? What is local government Victoria, the minister, etc., saying on this? Because they've flagged some advice, haven't they, for councils, and potentially some changes to help them, or tools to help deal with this? Yeah,
there has been a bulletin put out in the last week. It does, and it's termed managing disruptive behaviour, and it does go to that, telling councils to, reminding councils that they consider other means of holding meetings, including holding meetings via those digital electronic forms. I'm not really a big fan of that as a wholesale solution, because I think it's nice to be able to come along and actually observe a council meeting more than just being through a lens or a screen on your laptop. Be actually present in the room and be able to engage with councillors and officers that way. But clearly, it's one of the options. But I was interested to see that Local Government Victoria also was calling on in that bulletin councils to look at what mechanisms they have in their governance rules to better manage public participation in meetings, and including what have they got in their rules about managing bringing in promotional or offensive material, placards, posters, banners that can be quite offensive or harassing for some people. There was even a point in that bulletin about councils considering what procedures have they got in place to require attendees to register their attendance, provide proof of identity, because if we're going to call out someone or have them removed from a meeting and there be consequences, we need to know who they really are. If they're going to be banned from council premises because of poor behaviour, we need to know their correct identity. So Local Government Victoria did say in that bulletin that they would be releasing further guidance in future. So we'll look out for that. Whether that's a model local law or something like that would be interesting.
Okay, so we'll wait on that. It's sad, Julie, that we've come to this point where we're talking about councils needing to have are we going to get to the point where we've got facial recognition at council chambers because people have been banned, like from the MCG?
Maybe, Chris. I don't know. Things keep moving so rapidly in this space, and local government continuously has to respond in different ways. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with that down the track.
Let's hope not.
We've got checks and balances in when you walk into Parliament. You've got to be scanned. You've got to be
show ID.
Show ID. It's no different, really. So maybe this is the way of the future. It's look again. It's sad because we're going down this route for a minority of the community that is causing issues for the council, where the majority of the community are actually quite reasonable to deal with and come along to meetings and participate respectfully and do the right thing. So it's a bit of a shame, but I'm not surprised that LGV have put out a bulletin. That's what they do in these situations, and it's good that they've flagged in there some potential ideas and solutions in which to suggest to councils. So, yeah.
All right. Not the first time rules have been put in place to deal with the behaviour of the few as opposed to the many. I'd like to give Greater Geelong a bit of a rest this week. The Geelong Advertiser isn't. They had at least 3 big stories last weekend about, what's happened with their finance system, what the minister's saying about the potential to remove the councillors, and some profiles of the people behind the scenes who are pulling the strings, etc. But there was a story that did catch my eye late last week where let's just remember lots of coverage of the budget, lots of talk about the financial challenges, the need to make savings in various ways. And of course, one of those savings turns out to be the advertising that's being bought in the newspaper itself. So what does the newspaper do? Well, it runs a big expose suggesting that that decision is related to the negative media coverage. You can't win.
Yeah, look, this brought to mind, actually, for me, the Moira Commission of Inquiry, actually, because there was a bit of consideration about this. So, of course, here in Geelong, the acting CEO says, as you say, the decision's about, a review of operational expenditure. If they need to advertise in the local media, they'll do that on a case-by-case basis. Whereas the Geelong Advertiser suggesting that, this decision really reflects their, recent coverage of that community outrage around the draft budget, that expose, as you say, on staff morale, personnel departures. In the Moira Commission of Inquiry, the commissioners considered a decision by the CEO at the time at Moira Shire to withdraw all council advertising from the New Merca Leader after there'd been some anti-vax stories in the New Merca Leader, but generally also some stories that were quite negative about the council. Commission of Inquiry was quite critical of that decision of council, which was ultimately reversed prior to the commission commencing for council to withdraw its advertising. And the quote in the report was that it was a sledgehammer response to a nutshell, and that there could be no other, steps taken to, resolve concerns about, stories that were being written. Yeah. So I wonder if that's analogous, and what attitude the new CEO will take to this.
Yes, interesting after the situation that happened in Western Australia, and the name of the council is escaping me at the moment. It might have been town of Cambridge, where the local paper that had been publishing negative stories was removed from the libraries for a period of time. That's been rectified. That's never the answer, Julie, to a problem like that, is it?
No, I don't think so, Chris. It seems like sometimes a bit of an extreme response to something. But look, I can understand the frustration. And we've seen from what happened at Moira. So we've learned from that, maybe not a great move, but, they're well within their rights to make that decision.
All right. A couple of councillor resignations, or a couple of countbacks actually have been scheduled. One new councillor resignation since last week. Larry Goldsworthy, a long-term councillor at Indigo Shire. He's a full-time policeman and has said, he's got a pretty full plate, so he's stepping away from council to concentrate on his other responsibilities. I wanted to ask the two of you to guess where we're at in terms of numbers of extraordinary election processes this term of council.
I was going to ask you that, Chris, because you've got your finger on the pulse.
This will be number 44.
Okay.
Does that sound like a lot in less than 3 years?
Wow, that seems like a lot, Chris. I don't know what the numbers were in the last election period. Do we know what those numbers were?
No, I haven't been able to go back and do those numbers, but I have been keeping track this council term. So this is my tally. I think it's pretty accurate. It includes a couple right at the start of the term when there were failed elections because of insufficient candidates. There was a tragic death of a candidate or an elected candidate before they could even take office, I think, if I recall correctly. But in total, it's 44, and the Indigo countbacks on the 9th of August. The Strathbogie countback to replace David Andrews, which we talked about last week, is coming up next Wednesday, the 12th of July. But with more than a year to go in the term, it's looking like we're going to get up to around 50 or more, potentially, if we get a few councillors deciding that they've had enough as the next round of elections approaches.
And a big shout out, Chris, to the VEC that are working really hard in doing all these countbacks, because indeed. I bet you they didn't anticipate there was going to be that many.
Well, that's perhaps we should reach out, and ask,
so.
Did they? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Is this normal? Did they anticipate and potentially budget for that amount of activity? In passing, I just want to note that there's something happening in New South Wales that we will want to keep an eye on. It's a review of the financial model of local government that the minister there has committed to as an election commitment before getting into government. This comes as a lot of councils have been given permission to put their rates up significantly this coming financial year. The IPART, the tribunal, is conducting a review of its own of the rate peg methodology. This one's going to go much further and look at the whole financial model. And I know there'll be some mayors, particularly in Victoria, watching this one with great interest, Tony.
Yeah, they will. This was an election commitment, I gather, from the New South Wales Labor Party, who then got elected, and the local government minister Ron Honig has said, yeah, we promised to do it. We're going to do it, and it's it's a wholesale review, independent review of the financial model for councils, and let's see what comes out of that, because as I say, there are a lot of Victorian council laws, and council officers will be looking at that and seeing if there are any any analogies to draw from recommendations there.
Yep, they're doing the terms of reference as we speak, as I understand it. A couple of overseas stories. I know for each of you, you've got an overseas story for your pick of the week. A couple I wanted to mention before we get to that. The 4-day workweek trial that we've mentioned before at South Cambridgeshire Council in England, they had hailed it a success. We're looking to extend it through to next year. But the government minister has come in over the top and said, this is not appropriate for local government. It may not even be legal, and has effectively ordered the council to stop the trial. The council's very disappointed in seeking discussions with the ministers about that. But even Michael Gove, who's one of the senior government ministers, has come out since and said, council workers should be working 5 days a week, full stop. Julie, you're shaking your head.
I just can't believe that they've overrid this. There must have been a concern, I think, of the government that it was going to have a knock-on effect across all sectors, not just local government. Or whether they're just worried of the perception that it's going to be in the community that council workers are only working 4 days a week. So there's got to be a lot behind it. Maybe a trial like that, they're worried about it having this knock-on effect across other sectors. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just think that, if it's a trial, let them continue on and see what it unfolds, because, without that kind of flexibility, then how can councils continue to operate and attract, staff that they need or want? They know what they need and they know how to operate their business. So, so other levels of government probably should not intervene in that, micromanaging of how they manage their staff.
Yeah.
I was a bit surprised about that, but very disappointed. I would have been really keen to see what that did unfold in terms of learnings.
Yeah, and what you've said is almost exactly what the council leader has said. It's actually helped them deal with the need for expensive agency staff by making it a more attractive place to work for people. But Tony, the government said that might be okay in the private sector. It's not appropriate in the public sector.
Yeah. The minister did cite, some backlogs at council, some community needs, and suggested councils need to innovate in different ways. Look, I don't think we'd see this sort of reaction in Victoria. Also, particularly not in Victoria, I think the Australian Services Union has a big say in what goes on.
Yeah, true.
In here. But look, this pilot, it commenced in January 2023. As I say, the first council in the UK to trial a system like this. It was for office workers, so workers who were behind a desk, so 450 desk-based council staff, and it had recently been extended till March next year. So obviously, council thought it was working quite well, as you say. But no, it appears to have been shut down. Let's see what comes out of this over the next few weeks.
I think, and perhaps this is where some of the concerns have arisen. I think they were looking at, with the extension, ways to bring outdoor workers into that trial, and that might have been one of the red flags, perhaps, for government people. But anyway, disappointing to hear, and we'll wait to see what happens next. Just quickly want to mention, I don't know if any of you have been to the Orkney Islands. It's on my list. I'd like to go there one day. Are you nodding, Julie? Have you been to the Orkneys?
No. I'm nodding with interest and excitement about the Orkney Islands. That's a place that I'd really like to get to as well. But
well, I got a bit of a history lesson.
Scottish history, but obviously
well, yes,
not.
But that is the point. So yes, I got a bit of a history lesson looking into this this week. It's only been under Scottish control since 1472.
Only.
Prior to that, at various times, it was under the control of Norway or Denmark, and they're saying it was actually under Scandinavian control in historical terms for a much longer period than it's been part of Scotland and the UK. Well, the council there this week is meeting to consider whether they might break away from Scotland and the UK and go back to being part of Norway. Not every day that you get a council deciding on its sort of sovereignty, is there? Or attempting to, let us say.
And it would have to be the two countries that would have to agree, Chris.
You'd think so.
Yeah. They'd have to agree on the departure and the welcome. But interesting, because I think it was around they feel that they're being forgotten in terms of investment, aren't they? They're not getting much from the Scottish government and from overall from the UK government. So they're just sort of they are very concerned about the lack of investment. Now, I hope they've done their homework about if they do go across, whether or not they're going to be any more benefited from.
Yes, we don't want another Brexit, do we?
Control. That's right.
We'll talk about that in a moment. But
this is a stunt, isn't it? I mean, this is, look, we're talking about it in Australia.
That might be
bringing attention.
That might be their intent to get it onto the TGU panel menu.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure we've got viewers over in the Orkney Islands wrapped up in their coats at the moment in front of their open fires. But they've got a funding shortfall. What a great way to bring attention to it. We're going to secede, or this. Clearly, they haven't got the constitutional power to do that. But I think a good way to bring some attention.
Yes. And I wouldn't assume about the coats and the open fires. I know it's been a bit rainy at Wimbledon this week, but it's probably warmer there than it is here at the moment. Tony. Yeah, who knows? All right.
I'm not too sure about that, Chris.
No. Okay. All right. Let's do the picks of the week now. Julie, I mentioned Brexit, and you've got a story out of Northern Ireland, I think, related to Brexit.
That's right, Chris. And a council that I've never even heard of before, the Newry, Mourne and Down District Council in Northern Ireland. They have come out very loud and clear this week, blaming Brexit for causing the Northern Ireland workforce shortage.
Oh.
So interestingly, that particularly their seasonal workers that come in, the council has said that particularly the fishing industry, that people are jumping across the border to come in to get work. But they're saying that they've got acute pressures on their apple and mushroom producers. They don't have enough seasonal workers to come in. And they're calling on the UK government to relax the immigration rules to allow for visas for seasonal agricultural workers that are so critical to the way that they operate in Northern Ireland. So they're worried about the collapse of the horticultural industry and this inability to get enough workers to be able to get the food out to those people that need it in Northern Ireland. So a really interesting story. And I think that is something that I think was talked about early on, about these issues around the Brexit.
There was all this talk about a hard border, wasn't there? So just correct me. So Northern Ireland is the part that's part of the UK and it's Ireland that's separate, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's interesting, because I was reading the Australian Financial Review this morning. There's a term they're using now in the UK called regret, as in regret.
Yeah.
And the article talks about the majority of citizens now regretting the Brexit decision.
Goodness. Okay.
It's interesting. Another fact that I should have mentioned also, Chris, is that apparently the UK workers made up 95% of the seasonal workers that were coming into Northern Ireland to do that work. So that's a considerable amount of people that they no longer can have. And no wonder there are people crossing the border illegally to come in potentially to work. So there you go.
Seems like a lot of things that could have been logically foreseen that perhaps weren't, or they just took a few things on faith. But anyway, I'm no expert on Brexit. What I
Good
am,
on the council for having a voice and bringing this to the government's attention.
we are experts on age-old traditions of the mayoral office, of course. You know, mayoral robes and chains and kissing alligators. Tony.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're the mayor of San Pedro Guamelula in Oaxaca State in southern Mexico.
Oh, well done on the Oaxaca.
Oh yeah, that's age-old tradition, dates back to pre-Hispanic days, and so if we get the image up when this goes out, you'll see the Cayman crocodile in the bride's gown, and
Little Princess, she's called.
Little Princess. It's to bring good fortune. The mayor has to kiss the snout of his alligator bride. Imagine if we had this in Australia, folks. Would you be kissing the saltwater crocodile or the red?
Well, yeah, are we sure this
doesn't?
Are we sure this doesn't already happen in the NT?
It probably does.
Guys, we're meant to be building the reputation of councils, not breaking them down.
But yeah, absolutely extraordinary the lengths they'll go to bring good fortune in San Pedro Guamelula.
Yes, well done to the mayor, Victor Hugo Sosa, I think his name was. I love the name, and don't be afraid about what may or may not have happened, because poor old Little Princess had her snout tied firmly shut for that ritual, as you probably noticed in the picture. All right, that's Tony's pick of the week. That's a lot of stuff we've gotten through again this week. Any final thoughts, Julie?
No, Chris, but just a big shout out to Port Phillip City. I was up there last night seeing Mozart's Idomeneo, which is a Victorian state opera. Beautiful to be up in the city of Port Phillip last night, even though it was really cold.
How very cultured of you, Julie. And I
very
see
cultured night in the city of Port Phillip.
Port Phillip got the treatment from a current affair during the week, so we send our best wishes to them for the recovery. Tony,
can I give a shout out?
Yes.
I'll give a shout out to my local council, one of my local councils. But I was going to Woolies last night. You know, my darling wife had needed me to buy yogurt at the last minute, and about 7:30, and a council member handed me a flyer about the draft community local law review, and there was just up the road at the Lorimar Community Centre, there was a session for community consultation around that local law, which of course, as in every council, very broad, deals with pets and fireplaces and these sorts of things. Had a look and got to speak to Rebecca Rastevsky, who was the council officer who helped write that local law, and noticed that there were provisions in the law that's gone out for comment around requiring proof of identity for attendees at council events. And I think that that's a smart move. And also, you know, kudos to Whittlesea for their, you know, consultative process. And well, it worked for me. Walking to Woolies, they've dragged me into the community centre to provide my comments on the local law.
Excellent. I can say with some authority that the city of Whittlesea does engagement exceptionally well, and there's some proof. Well done, Tony, for taking part. All right. I just want to give a plug to the next VLGA LGIU Global Panel, which is coming up next Thursday evening, 5:30 Australian time. We've got Professor John Thwaites. He was the first Minister for Climate Change in not just Victoria, but in Australia. He's on our panel. We've got the CEOs of Aberdeen in Scotland and Louth in Ireland. And we've got an executive from the Great Barrier Marine Authority, the Marine Reef Authority, talking about how do you take climate action on a daily basis, meeting community expectations while being in a state of, I don't really like the term, but this state of perma crisis that people are talking about. So get in and register for that. That's online next Thursday. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Tony, for another great TGU. And we'll see you all next week here on VLGA Connect. Bye for now.